Ramadan is about discipline and self-control. So why do we see luxury buffets, forced fasting, and post-Ramadan overindulgence? Today, we're breaking down the biggest contradictions in how Ramadan is practiced.
I'm Sarah, and I have one job: to ask the questions that make people uncomfortable. If Ramadan is about simplicity, why does it feel so extravagant?
And I'm Imam Khalid. I've studied these questions for years, and trust me, Ramadan is full of paradoxes. Let's break them down.
Trust me, you'll want to stick around, because the final question might challenge everything about Ramadan's true purpose. You spend the whole day fasting, practicing self-control, and then iftar turns into an all-you-can-eat feast. So, is Ramadan really about discipline, or is it just delayed indulgence?
Okay, help me out here. Ramadan is supposed to teach self-restraint, right? You fast all day, remind yourself to be grateful, stay away from excess. And then boom! The sun sets, and suddenly it's fried food, sugar overload, and luxury buffets. I mean, I've seen iftars that look like wedding receptions. How did a month about simplicity turn into a time of over-the-top feasting? If fasting is about discipline, shouldn't iftar be the simplest meal of the day?
The Lux Iftar paradox, where we spend all day learning restraint only to test how much we can eat in one sitting. The problem isn't iftar itself, it's how we approach it. In theory, we're supposed to break our fast with moderation. But hunger does weird things to people. Add social gatherings, fancy events, and cultural traditions, and suddenly iftar becomes a status symbol instead of a meal. The Prophet, PBUH, broke his fast with dates and water. So trust me, he wasn't at a five-star buffet.
Okay, but why does this happen? I mean, we know we're supposed to eat mindfully, but instead we pile our plates like it's a survival mission. It's like the brain goes, I suffered all day, now I deserve this. But isn't that missing the whole point? If Ramadan is about learning restraint, but we just reward ourselves with excess, doesn't that turn fasting into a temporary diet instead of real self-discipline?
That's exactly the issue. If fasting is just temporary self-denial, then it's not real self-control, it's just postponed indulgence. It's the same reason why people on strict diets often binge after restricting too much. The moment we turn iftar into a compensation meal, we undo everything fasting was supposed to teach us. And here's where it gets worse: waste. Some iftars produce more food waste than an entire week of regular meals. So are we really practicing gratitude, or are we just replacing one excess with another?
Ugh, that's the part that really gets me. We literally pray about gratitude before breaking our fast, and then we waste food like it's nothing. I've seen videos of garbage bins overflowing with untouched iftar meals. So are we really appreciating what we have, or are we just going through the motions while keeping all our old habits? Because if Ramadan is supposed to change us, but we go back to excess every single night, then are we even learning anything?
That's the real question. Is Ramadan transforming us, or are we just waiting for the fast to be over? Because self-control isn't just about what we don't do during the day, it's about what we choose to do after sunset. But speaking of choice, what happens when fasting stops being a choice at all? The next paradox is all about whether Ramadan is truly voluntary, or if it's sometimes forced.
So, is iftar a moment of gratitude, or just an excuse to make up for lost meals? But that's just the beginning, because the next paradox asks an even bigger question. If fasting is a personal sacrifice, why is it sometimes forced? Ramadan is supposed to be a personal, spiritual journey. But what happens when fasting stops being a choice?
All right, here's what I don't get. We always hear that fasting is a personal act of devotion, right? It's supposed to be between you and God. But in some places, not fasting isn't even an option. Restaurants close by law, people get shamed for eating. And in some countries, you can literally be fined or arrested for having a sip of water during the day. So, is fasting really about faith, or is it about following the crowd?
You've hit the heart of the non-fasting paradox. If fasting is meant to be voluntary, then why is it socially or legally enforced in some places? The truth is, Islam itself doesn't force fasting on those who can't or shouldn't fast. The Quran literally says people who are sick, pregnant, or traveling are excused. But over time, some cultures turned fasting into a public expectation, and in some cases, even a law. But here's the problem. If you're only fasting because you're afraid of judgment or punishment, does that even count as a true sacrifice?
That's exactly my point. If fasting is supposed to be about self-control, then shouldn't it come from free will? If someone fasts because they're scared of consequences, they're not actually choosing to fast. They're just avoiding trouble. And what about people who literally can't fast, like those with medical conditions? If someone needs to eat, but they're too scared to do it in public, isn't that punishing them for something they can't control?
Absolutely. That's why Islam is way more flexible than people realize. If fasting harms you, you're not supposed to do it. Period. But here's the catch. People sometimes value cultural expectations over religious teachings. Instead of emphasizing personal sincerity, they turn Ramadan into a test of public obedience. And here's where it gets really ironic. Forcing fasting actually goes against the core principles of Islam, which teaches that faith must be a personal choice, not an obligation.
See, that's what confuses me. If Islam itself allows exceptions for fasting, then why do some people act like anyone who eats during the day is committing a crime? It's almost like we've turned fasting into a performance. If people can see you fasting, you're good. If they see you eating, you're bad. But what if someone is fasting quietly without showing off? Doesn't that count more than someone who just fasts for social approval?
Exactly. Ramadan is about inner faith, not public image. If someone is only fasting because of pressure, then they've missed the entire point of what it means to make a personal sacrifice. But speaking of contradictions, if Ramadan is supposed to purify the body, then why do so many people actually gain weight during the month? The next paradox flips everything you thought you knew about fasting and health.
So if fasting is meant to be personal, why does it sometimes feel like an obligation? But here's something even stranger. If Ramadan is supposed to cleanse the body, why do so many people come out of it less healthy than before? Ramadan is supposed to cleanse your body. It is supposed to improve your health. So why do so many people gain weight instead?
All right, explain this to me. Everyone says fasting is great for your body. It's supposed to help you reset, detox, and improve your health. But somehow, by the end of Ramadan, half the people I know have gained weight, feel sluggish, and complain about digestion issues. So, are we really cleansing our bodies or just starving all day to binge at night?
The health paradox, where a month meant for self-discipline somehow turns into a junk food festival. The truth is, Ramadan itself isn't unhealthy, but the way some people break their fasts is. Instead of moderation, people go straight for fried foods, sugar overload, and heavy meals. The body just spent all day in fasting mode, so hitting it with an instant caloric explosion isn't cleansing, it's shock therapy.
Yeah, that's what makes no sense to me. If we're only eating 1 or 2 meals a day, shouldn't that mean we're automatically consuming fewer calories? Like, on paper, this should be a perfect weight loss plan. But instead, people somehow manage to overeat in a single meal. Is this just a problem of self-control, or is something else going on?
It's actually both. Hunger tricks the brain into making bad decisions. After a long fast, your body craves high-energy foods, which is why people instinctively go for fried foods, carbs, and sweets. It's not even conscious. It's biology. And then there's the psychological factor. People treat iftar as a reward instead of a refueling stop. Instead of listening to their bodies, they eat until they can't move. That's why some people end Ramadan heavier than they started.
Okay, so let me get this straight. Fasting should make us healthier, but if we overeat, pick the wrong foods, and ignore our body's signals, we actually make ourselves worse. So then, are people following Ramadan's rules without following its purpose? Because if someone spends 30 days not eating during the day, but overeating at night, are they really practicing self-discipline, or just delaying their bad habits until after sunset?
Exactly. The whole point of Ramadan is balance, self-awareness, and discipline. But if we treat iftar as a daily reward for suffering, we miss the lesson entirely. Ramadan isn't just about what we give up, it's about what we learn. But speaking of learning, what if everything we just practiced disappears overnight? Because the biggest paradox isn't Ramadan itself, it's what happens the moment it ends.
So if fasting is meant to improve our health, why do so many people end up worse off? But here's an even bigger contradiction. If Ramadan teaches us restraint, why do we abandon it completely as soon as Eid begins? Ramadan is supposed to teach us self-control and moderation. So why does it all go out the window the second Eid begins?
Okay, this one really gets me. We spend 30 days practicing restraint, fasting, eating mindfully, avoiding excess. Then Eid arrives and suddenly it's nonstop feasting, sweets everywhere, new clothes, gifts, shopping sprees. It's like we hit the undo button on everything we just learned. If Ramadan is about long-term self-improvement, why do we immediately go back to indulgence the second it's over?
The Eid paradox, where a month of self-discipline somehow leads to one of the most indulgent days of the year. Now, don't get me wrong. Eid is meant to be a celebration. Islam encourages joy, gratitude, and sharing blessings. The problem isn't the celebration itself. It's when we turn it into overconsumption. We spend 30 days learning moderation and then immediately test how fast we can unlearn it.
See, that's what makes no sense. If Ramadan is supposed to change us, shouldn't that change last beyond the month? But instead, it feels more like a temporary sacrifice, where we behave for 30 days just so we can reward ourselves at the finish line. If someone fasts all month but then treats Eid like a binge fest, did they actually learn anything? Or did they just pause their indulgence for a while?
That's exactly the challenge. Was the fasting just a ritual or was it a real transformation? Ramadan isn't supposed to be a one-month crash course in self-control. It's meant to build lifelong habits. But too often, people treat fasting like a seasonal challenge, where the goal is just to get through it instead of actually growing from it. And here's where it gets really ironic. True gratitude isn't about how much we feast, it's about how much we remember what we learned.
Exactly. If Ramadan's purpose is to make us better people, but the second it's over, we forget all the lessons, then did we actually change it all? It's almost like people aren't really practicing self-discipline, they're just waiting for the rules to expire. So, is Ramadan actually transforming people? Or is it just a temporary break before going back to the exact same habits?
That's the real test. Is Ramadan just a countdown to Eid? Or is it supposed to shape who we become after it? If self-control only lasts as long as the fast, then it's not real self-control at all. The real question isn't how we act during Ramadan, it's how we live after it's over.
So if Ramadan is meant to change us, why does it seem like nothing changes once it's over? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if paradoxes like this blow your mind, click the next video. Because trust me, we have plenty more reality-breaking ideas waiting for you.